In this series, I'm going to explore some of the personalities in Infinity and chronicle their exploits in the fiction and their uses on the table. You're going to get a deep dive into on-the-ground events and history from various sources to give you a taste for the shadowy machinations in the human sphere. Fusilier Angus has one of the longest service records of any Fusilier in PanOceania. However, a long record is not a glorious record. Angus is a living legend, but you don't always want living legends in your squad. I'm certainly not going to invite Madeline Albright to hang out. Angus is a danger multiplier. If you're safe, he's not. If you're in danger, then he's probably already bleeding out on the floor. He's spent more time convalescing than he has on active duty. There's a reason that his superiors call him that bumbling idiot. He's managed to be involved in a variety of incidents across the human sphere, and his presence usually means that the mission will fail in an exciting and spectacular way. So, why isn't he dead or court-martialed? Well, Angus is popular, and he's a release valve. He's a mascot for the PanOceanian line infantry. His misadventures make him feel relatable for the countless Fusiliers in the military. He's tough and he's stubborn, and he acts as a whipping boy for any PR disasters. If the news is reporting on an incident involving Fusilier Angus, then they aren't reporting on any other expensive failures, training accidents, or black operations. The common nomad soldier doesn't need to fear Fusiliers, so it's no problem to paint them as a bunch of buffoons via Angus's popularity. The Fusiliers often empathize with him while looking up to veteran troops like Noken or Bolts. On the tabletop, Angus is an early civilian miniature. He might be the first. If you can find him, he's a great choice for an HVT or high-value target. The model itself is pretty old though, and I don't think he's worth searching out. Angus is a good candidate for kit bashing. Our story starts in the year 66 NC on the planet Paradiso. Small, joint patrols by human sphere powers were a common way to spread the load of defending the Norstralia front, and several fire teams of Fusiliers and Celestial Guard were sent on peacekeeping patrol. Among the Fusiliers were Fusilier Indigo Bipandra and Fusilier Angus. The latter was in charge of navigation, and he misread both his orders and the map coordinates. I would have probably checked my mission and my objectives before leaving, but that's just me, a person whose experience informs his actions. The misread turned out okay though. The Fusiliers managed to stumble into an abandoned military compound near the frontline city of Chengling. There is a smuggling operation utilizing an old storage depot for their illicit venture. This isn't terribly surprising. Many small smuggling rings operate on Paradiso, moving people and weapons and drugs. But the most lucrative and dangerous of all is to move voodoo tech, that is, strange equipment used by the Combined Army that defies conventional physics. Any piece of Combined Army gear can fetch a high price for scientists, military types, or eccentric collectors. The smugglers were wiped out, and post-mortem interrogation didn't provide much insight into their operations. However, Bipandra was able to deduce that every smuggling drop was being picked up by a small shipping firm. Every one of those firms was also owned by a shell company, which seemed to be controlled by one larger parent company. Bipandra Gauri is a cool-headed Fusilier Indigo. Whenever the PanOceanian military complex needs a special operation, that mission must be authorized by PanOceanian Special Operations Command, or POSOC. POSOC chooses what assets are best suited for the mission, and is responsible for standardizing training and planning for all Special Forces branches across the hyperpower. In addition to coordinating Spec Ops, POSOC has its own elite independent unit, Indigo. The color indigo is darker than PanOceanian blue, befitting their work in the shadows. Their motto is Ad Utrumque, ready for everything. Bipandra is an Indigo special operative. She's a field doctor and survival specialist, both of which she learned due to her relationship with Fusilier Angus. You see, when you're near Angus, you're near danger. Their meetings were random at first. The two of them would be sent to the same deployments around Paradiso. As time went on, she and Angus started to be treated as a single unit and deployed together on missions of varying importance. All of this made her strong. Every time Angus was healing, she'd spend her time training in survival and first aid. After all, any operation she was sent on would eventually become a special operation. She's patched him up on more occasions than she can recall, and has taken nearly as many hits herself for the trouble. Bipandra had an ear, an eye, and fingers all repaired with clone replacements. She's a mother bear for her cub Angus, lethal as well as protective. Unfortunately, there isn't much more to Bipandra. Like many female characters, she kind of exists to keep a clueless man happy and healthy. At least she seems to enjoy her work. Being deployed with Angus means things will never be dull. They say death is the poor man's doctor. PanOceania is rich, and they have Bipandra instead. On the tabletop, she's decent. Bipandra is overpriced because Pano doctors are always pricey. Just look at the Firmware or the Trauma Doc. Bipandra has some genuinely nice features. Whip 13 makes her a good doctor, but PanOceania's lower than average willpower means that 13 eats a good chunk of her points. Her loadout is good. She has a nanopulsar, combi rifle, and an NCA. She's a wild card. The doctor skill in Medikit gets a big buff in Pano. Most of her worthwhile targets are your expensive heavy infantry. See, normally you want to always get into base contact so you can use your doctor's whip stat. Shooting targets with the Medikit instead uses the target's physique stat. And in Pano, that's good, because all of those expensive heavies often have good physique stats. So it's risky, and it can save you precious orders. Also, as a wild card, she can be a very nice trooper if you need to repair a fire team and get them back up to fighting strength. Plus, she has a nanopulsar for fighting anyone with mimetism. Because the pack is out of print, so is Bipandra. If you want to use her, I recommend the Trauma Doc. That support pack got a gorgeous resculpt, and with a nice paint job, I think she'd be even better than the original Bipandra. After their successful bust of the smuggling operation, the Fusiliers were given leave in the city of Yuntuan. During downtime, many people end up doing one of two things: self-improvement or revelry. Angus chose merriment. Yuntuan itself is a fascinating city, and the capital of the Yujing State Empire in Australia. It's famous for its golden statues in the city center, constantly lit by bright neon glow on the lower streets. Sadly, Yuntuan is also famous for the gigantic numbers of refugees that surround the city's borders, all of them fleeing from the combat on Paradiso. Yuntuan looks and feels alive, vibrant, and filled with opportunity. The nightlife is filled with off-duty soldiers that make the local economy boom. One can be forgiven for not thinking about the refugees, out of sight and out of mind. Angus did his part to help the local economy by getting totally blasted, engaging on a multi-stop bar crawl with some Fusilier friends. He had a whale of a time. He even took control of the DJ booth at the Xiongmao Juba bar. While I would normally applaud him for having the courage to choose your own soundtrack, he unfortunately went to the wrong bar. He had declared himself the DJ of someone's 50th birthday party instead. His wild night continued until consciousness slipped away, and Angus fell into a drunken stupor in the arms of a one-night stand. This was all part of a combined army plan. Earlier in the war, Master Tactician Dodrek had been captured by Human Sphere forces. He was being held in the invisible prison known as Station Duzui 1, or Hammer 1. Located on Satori, one of Paradiso's moons, Hammer 1 held the most bloodthirsty and violent killers in Yujing, including many Morat prisoners of war. Unfortunately for the Morats, the actual location of the facility was unknown to the combined army, and it was guarded over by troopers of the Japanese Sectorial Army's elite 3rd Corps. It was deemed too difficult to have Morat or Shasvasti be intentionally captured and then attempt an escape from Hammer 1. For example, all Shasvasti prisoners are brought to separate facilities. Instead, Askiavoros concocted an elaborate scheme wherein a human would be implanted with an organic tracking device. The target human would be framed for a violent crime against the state empire and would swiftly be sent to Hammer 1. At that point, manufactured political pressures would force Yujing to release the target. After that, a team of Morats would be deployed to abduct the target, extract the tracking device, and confirm the location of Master Dodrek in the hidden prison. Morat leadership found this to be an extremely overcomplicated plan. For example, it needed a human who had numerous biological implants and reconstructive surgery to disguise the implant. It also needed a human who would be on Paradiso, be capable of being framed for a crime, and be valuable enough that politicians would lobby for their release. You'd need someone extremely unlucky. Angus woke up in a hotel room that wasn't his, holding 2 guns that he didn't recognize, covered in someone else's blood. By the time he managed to sit up, a team of celestial guards broke down the door. They were shouting things he didn't understand, trying to ask him why, oh why had he murdered the Imperial agents he worked with. All he could remember was everyone cheering him on as he popped a personal playlist into a bar's sound system. Why was all of this happening to him? Was this God's punishment for being too cool? While Angus was out partying, Bipandra did some real player character stuff. She suspected that the corporation behind that smuggling ring was either Magna Obra or the Yujing Interspace Trust. YJITC is one of the largest megacorps in the human sphere, and it is widely known to be controlled by the Jing, the eyes of the party of the state empire. During a scheduled emergency drill, Bipandra snuck in to confirm her suspicions. As an Indigo agent, she thought that she'd know everything there was to know about corporate security. However, there was a third party at play subverting the ITC security systems. Bipandra was knocked out and captured. If not for the help of some undercover O12 agents, she would have quietly disappeared. However, their convenient arrival let her hand off the investigation of the smugglers to Bureau Noir. She had a new job. She had to save Angus. Again! It was the early morning hours when she was sprinting through the streets of Yintuan. Bipandra's Indigo training told her to never broadcast your position to the enemy. That training also told her to stick with her team though, so Bipandra decided that if she was going to break one rule, she'd break them all. She turned on her comm log, and augmented reality objects filled her field of view. Maya infrastructure helped her find the absolute fastest route to the PanOceanian consulate. She dropped down the stairs, dashing through the gates of her hotel and onto the city streets. Celestial guards pursuing her began to use deadly force, firing their Type 1 combi rifles with measured bursts as she shifted to a sprint. Just as her strength was starting to leave her, she took a right and saw the entrance to the consulate. AR notifications filled her eyes, and she vaulted over the boom gate, falling onto the PanOceanian soil with a heavy thud. An Aquila guard brandished a weapon while the embassy quietly scanned her comm log. Bipandra smiled. She was safe. She was safe. And that meant she would live to kick the shit out of Angus for causing all this. Meanwhile, Angus was trapped in Hammer 1. If he had been a bit more interesting, like a Shasvasti officer or a hacker, he might be in the Cage 5 prison instead. Here, he was miserable, bruised, and subject to endless violent interrogations. Between moments of abject terror, he enjoyed simmering tension around ultraviolet level offenders. He enjoyed the simmering tension of bunking with ultra-violent offenders. The eyeless stare of a bald gangster with ocular implants haunted his dreams, and the laughing of scarred Morats haunted his waking hours. After 2 days of suffering, Angus was brought to the medical wing and put in stasis. He wasn't sure why he was there, and he wasn't sure why he was being released, but they told him he was going home, and he was thankful. The Fusilier was, of course, the target of that combined army special operation to free Dodrek. A small team of special forces was assembled and loaded into the rapid incursion ship Voldrak's Vengeance. The operation was going to be boring by Morat standards. The cargo train carrying the HVT was automated. Anyat promised them that as a reward, all the troops would be permitted to take part in the assault on Hammer 1. Anyat is cold, daring, and unscrupulous. She's a gambler, addicted to the thrills and spoils of war. Anyat isn't interested in glory or honor, just the pulse-pounding rush of putting it all on the line and then winning big. Anyat doesn't want to retire with a medal on her chest. She wants to retire early, with well-lined pockets. It's one of the reasons that she makes a good Tri-Tac operative. The worse the odds, the bigger the payout. Anyat is therefore an excellent Tri-Tac operative, since being outnumbered and outgunned is pretty standard practice for the Tri-Tac Special Forces. The Tri-Tac program is a special division of the Morat military. They are espionage agents, focused almost exclusively on violence. Other commando formations like Indigo or Spetsnaz might be deployed to perform recon, prisoner rescue, or sabotage. Tri-Tac agents are killers. Stealthy killers, to be sure, but they're first and foremost assassins. They wake up every day and choose violence. On the tabletop, Anyat is perfectly usable, and even better than she was in N3. She's got a functional close combat stat, and a heavy pistol to use if she gets engaged. Anyat has Climbing Plus, which is consistently useful for wall running and hiding. Her overstuffed profile gives her a K1 combi rifle and EM grenades for use against armored troops, and she makes good link filler in any fire teams she can join. Most importantly, she's a source of smoke. Expensive Suryat fire teams are prevalent in Morats, and Anyat is nearly an auto-include for them. Anyat was the first one on the train with the HVT. She ran along the wall of a container, sliding and firing her rifle until she made it to cover. She was happy to take risks. An hour earlier, she'd made a bet with Mission Control that she'd get more than 5 kills, and Anyat hated to lose. Her hands moved over the cargo containers. Holographic displays lit up, accepting unlock codes and showing her the target. A small medical stasis pod. Anyat slipped inside the boxy container. Her comm log made wireless connection to the pod, which quickly opened and expelled Angus. He fell to the ground in a shock, both at being reanimated and at seeing a Morat's tridactyl boot in his face. She dug her heel into his chest. "Have you seen this Morat?" She projected an image of Master Tactician Dodrek from her comm log. Angus screamed in terror for a moment before shifting to screams of pain, and finally screams of acquiescence. Yes, that scarred, scary-ass Morat who was laughing at me. That's all I needed to know. Anyat grimmed under her faceplate and delivered a swift punch to the human's face. She pulled out her knife and made a small incision into his side. There was a squelching sound as she placed a pair of tongs into the wound, which seemed to come alive and forcibly extract a tiny organic tracking device. Anyat reached for her pistol to put the victim out of his misery. Suddenly, she fell to her knees. Her ballistic vest absorbed the force of a small caliber bullet. Anyat whipped around, throwing a smoke grenade to the ground and tumbling out of the cargo car. She was happy she'd finished the mission, but slightly disappointed that she hadn't reached her kill count. But clearly, luck was on her side. As Anyat slid off the train, she was able to fire one last burst from her K1 rifle. The quiet thud of a soldier against the ground told her that she had won the bet. Mission Control was buying drinks tonight. Bipandra knelt down as the smoke cleared. Angus had lost a lot of blood. How often do we have to do this, Angus? Bipandra sighed as she started to disinfect the wound. He wasn't in any condition to talk, but his grimace did shift to a smile as she applied a suite of painkillers. Bipandra just couldn't understand why the Morat was so interested in Angus's body.
Psi unit reports that the phrase Hammer 1 is linked to the supposed invisible
serious material losses in a mass prison break.
Within days, Hammer 1 had been assaulted and there was a mass breakout. State Empire High Command moved swiftly in reaction. Despite the protests of Sanze and much of the Japanese population, the popular general Oi Tanemura was publicly fired from her role as commander of the Japanese Third Corps in Paradiso. The Third Corps was widely regarded as the best fighting forces in the Japanese sectorial army and one of the better army corps in the Empire. Even while responding to the breakout, General Tanemura had displayed tactical acumen, catching 67 of the escapees through a series of clever small response groups. This even forced the Third Corps to pause combat deployments and accommodate a politically motivated Imperial Service investigation. State-run media suggested that Japanese made for hard workers but poor leaders, and that they were politically unreliable. A few social influencers even insinuated that Tanemura had contacts within the combined army before the breakout. Pressure mounted on Japanese society at large, and corporate enterprises in specific. The results of the breakout would be more than another patch job for Fusilier Angus. Thanks again for watching. The visuals on this bad boy are not as fancy, and you'll just have to live with that. I've been told that a lot of people just put these on while painting, and that's probably good. I'm trying to break into that super long YouTube video meta. Anyway, thanks a lot. Give me a comment or something. Bye.